Hello everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of An American in Thailand, airing every Friday. This program is broadcast from Ratchamakon University of Technology, Peranakan, and I will be bringing it to you in two parts. For the first part, we will introduce a certain topic about being an American here living in Thailand. It could be about food, travel, culture, anything like that. We'll then take a break, and in the second part of our program, we'll get into some examples and more specifics. All right, let's get to the show. Welcome everyone, my name is Gary Gray, and I am your host for An American in Thailand. I am an English teacher here at Ratchamakon University of Technology, Peranakan, and I've been here teaching for a little over 8 years. So I've been here quite a while, which is why I think I've been here long enough to be able to speak about differences between American and Thai culture. And we talk about different things here. It could be about the food. Food is kind of a cultural thing. So it's all kind of culture or travel. We've also done a few episodes about the weather. And we're going to do another one of those this week. It may seem a little bit weird. Why do we keep talking about the weather? There's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's just my background, to be honest with you. Back in America, I was actually a weather scientist. A weather scientist is called a meteorologist. That's what a weather scientist is called. So back in America, I was a weather scientist. But there's another reason I want to talk about it today, because there is a topic we have not discussed yet about weather here in Thailand. One thing I have noticed here, I admit I've heard it a little bit less lately, but I used to hear it a lot of times. Maybe it's because I would tell someone that I was a weather scientist, and so they'd want to talk to me about the weather. And that is that people here in Thailand often complain about the bad forecasts here. People also complain about that in America, but the forecasts there are really pretty good. I think the expectations maybe are just higher because America puts a lot more resources into their weather forecasting. And so I think the expectations are for the forecasts to be almost perfect every day. But a lot of people here in Thailand, I hear them complaining about the weather forecast. Like, oh, you can't trust the weather forecast, blah, 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 blah. So one thing I want to talk about is why that is. And we're going to get into the details in the second part of the program. But in our first section here, I just want to briefly talk about why I don't think that it's just because your meteorologists are worse. Meteorologist, again, that's the weather scientist, the person forecasting the weather. Not every meteorologist does forecasts. Some of them do research and things like that. But the forecaster is also a meteorologist. So these weather forecasters. I think a lot of people here in Thailand just think the weather forecasters are bad. The meteorologists are bad. I'm here to tell you that I do not think that's the case. I don't think so. I will mention in the second part that could be a small part of it. Maybe they're not quite as good as some meteorologists trained in the West, but some of them may have been trained in the West, so some of the ones here. So that's probably not a very good reason. So what I'm saying is that no, the meteorologists here, for the most part, are not worse than they are in America. They're not bad meteorologists. They're not bad weather forecasters. In fact, I can tell you that I know firsthand, because again, I used to be a weather scientist back in America. So I know about some of the programs and activities that were going on. I can tell you for a fact that they actually the meteorologists here in Thailand get some of their training from American meteorologists. And about 5 years ago, They actually obtained from America the same weather model, the same computer model that the Americans use. It had to be modified for use in Thailand because of the way the system works, but it's the same core code. It's the same basic model, weather model. They got it from America. And I'm using America as an example because America probably has, I don't know if I want to say we have the best in meteorology. There are some European countries that are extremely good as well. So I don't want to sound like, oh, because I'm American. Oh, yes, America's the best. No, I don't know if that's the case. But it has some of the best. We also have probably the most diverse weather in the world. For example, we get blizzards and snowstorms in the winter. Because of our geography, even hot places can occasionally get really cold. There was a big story about this maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, with people dying in Texas, which is usually a hot state, because it got so cold in the winter. People actually died because they don't have heat for their houses or whatever, because they're not used to it being cold. And so they froze to death. So we get crazy weather. There's more tornadoes in America than anywhere else in the world. I'm not sure if I mentioned that one already. I think I just mentioned the blizzards and the cold weather. We get hurricanes and things like that. I still do a little bit of weather just for fun on the side, since that's what my degree was in back in America. And I've been paying attention to tracking Hurricane Erin, which was in the Atlantic Ocean, got kind of close to the U.S. Didn't hit them, but it looked like maybe it could for a while. So I was tracking that. They get hit by those usually at least a couple a year. They actually haven't had one this year. They've had a couple of tropical storms, but not hurricanes. A hurricane is the same as a typhoon. And so if you're familiar with the way they name storms here around Thailand, a tropical storm is weaker than a typhoon. A typhoon is when it gets stronger. So it's the exact same thing in the Atlantic Ocean, except that we use the word hurricane instead of typhoon. So we have all kinds of crazy weather in America. And because of that, the American meteorologists have to be trained in just about everything. We have to be trained in severe weather like thunderstorms, tornadoes, hail, that sort of thing. We need to be trained in hurricanes. We need to be trained in just normal storms. We need to be trained in winter storms, whether it's going to be snow or sleet or freezing rain. In fact, a lot of people just in the general public don't even know the difference between sleet and hail, because it's both ice falling from the sky. And there is a difference. Sleet happens when rain comes down and freezes, and it's usually in cold weather. Hail is usually in warm weather. It's a thunderstorm sends the rain so far up because there's winds actually blowing upwards that the water gets all the way up and so high in the sky that it freezes. And eventually it becomes too heavy because it's ice. And so it will fall all the way down, and it reaches the ground before it has time to melt because it falls pretty quickly. And so, even though it's warm out, it still hits the ground as ice. And so that's the difference. They're totally different, even though they look kind of similar. Hail is usually bigger, but you can get very small hail. So they can look fairly similar sometimes. But yeah, hail and sleet, totally different things. So we need to be trained in all of that, all the different types of weather that can go on. So it's pretty crazy. I mention that because, again, these Thai meteorologists are trained by the American meteorologists. Not trained in everything. I'm not saying that we have some program set up where America sends meteorologists over here all the time. No, that's not the case. But I do know that at least in that there was training, for example, for this weather model to get them trained up on that. I also do know, because I actually know of a few of them personally, I also know that some of the Thai meteorologists actually studied in America. So they've been trained by American meteorologists just by the fact that they studied over there. So a lot of these meteorologists are trained in some way. Again, I'm not saying there's a big training program, but a lot of the Thai meteorologists have been trained in some way by American meteorologists. And again, just because I'm an American, I'm not trying to say the American meteorologists are the best. There are some great meteorology programs, government programs in a lot of European countries as well. Japan has a good meteorology department. Australia has a good meteorology department. I don't know about China's. They're a big enough country, and they get a lot of different weather there as well. They should have a pretty good program, but they're kind of secretive, so we don't see too much from them. But I think their program is maybe pretty good as well. I'm not sure about them. So again, I'm not saying that America's is the best, but it's among the better systems out there, like government programs for weather forecasting. And at least on some degree, and I will repeat this for like the 10th time, I don't mean that there's a big training program. As far as I know, there isn't. There could be. I don't know everything that's going on with the Thai Meteorological Department, but I believe there's not. But they are at least in some way trained by the American meteorologists. So I believe, my point of all of that is that I believe that the Thai forecasters here are pretty much just as good as everyone else. This is not... So when you're talking about, why are the forecasts so bad all the time? Don't blame the meteorologists. I will explain to you in the second part of our program what's happening and why the forecasts are so bad. And I would agree, the forecasts are pretty bad here quite often. I will also give you an example of what's going on right now with one of those forecasts, which is even practically while the weather's ongoing, we still don't even really know. It looks like we have a pretty good idea now, but I mean, the weather had to basically be on top of us before we even knew what was happening. And I'll give you an example of that also in the second half. All right. So that's kind of your general introduction here. That's the first half of our program. And it's just to set you up with the fact that the Thai meteorologists, the Thai weather forecasters, are not doing a bad job. Yeah, the forecasts aren't great. In the second half, I'll give you the details on why their forecasts are not always so great. All right, before we get to that, let's take a quick break. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so we're talking about the difficulty of weather forecasting here in Thailand. And this is from like an American perspective. So some of this I want to talk about what are the differences between forecasting in America. Because in America, the weather forecasts still aren't always great either. But they tend to be better. They're better than the forecasts here in Thailand. And so a lot of people think that the Thai forecasters are to blame. I'm going to tell you that they're not. At least not mostly. I have 3 points I'm going to make in this second half. My first one is that, yeah, they might be a little worse. The training and education they've received might not be as high quality as some of the American or European or Australian training and education. But as I mentioned, a lot of these guys are getting some of that education and training from those countries. So I still think mostly the forecasters here are just as good as they are in America, Europe, Australia, Japan. I think they're just as good as those folks. If you were to take the whole average of all of the meteorologists here in Thailand and look at the whole average of all of the meteorologists in Europe, Japan, Australia, America, Canada, yeah, the Thai meteorologists might be a little bit below that, but I don't think there's a huge step down because, like I said, most of them are getting some sort of training or education from these other countries. I think 90% of the blame for bad forecasting here in Thailand does not go on the Thai meteorologists. But I do want to mention that there could be a small bit, maybe 10%, a small amount. I do want to at least acknowledge that. I'm certainly almost entirely defending them, saying that they're doing a good job. I'm not. That little 10% is that I do want to be a little bit honest. Sometimes, Thailand is kind of a developing country still. Not quite as rich as some of these other countries. So maybe the educational system sometimes might be a slightly lower standard, things like that. So I just want to be honest about what we're talking about here. So it is possible that the Thai meteorologists are a little bit worse, but I don't think they're a lot worse. I don't think that is the biggest problem going on. All right, so the second issue, and this might be one of the biggest issues. We're seeing it happen right now. The second issue is money. Money. It costs a lot of money to generate all of the data you need to put into those weather models. And those weather models are really help us a lot in doing our forecasts. It takes a lot of money to collect all of that data. Instruments are needed to collect the data. For example, we have weather balloons in America that are launched at like 50, 60, 70 different places, launched twice a day. They are actually trying to cut that back, so we're going in the wrong direction in America under our current government administration, which I am not pleased with because we actually really need more data. We don't have enough. So we're definitely going in the wrong direction. But nonetheless, at this point, that's what we have. So we have to launch these weather balloons twice a day. And the whole thing just gets lost, right? I mean, they do have a box on there which asks them to mail it back and they can salvage some of the parts or whatever, but most people don't send those back. So it's just gone. So that's not something you retrieve. All those sites, twice a day, every day. Occasionally they'll do special ones if there's a big storm that they're worried about to make sure they get the data right. And that's just one data source. There's also data from satellites. There's data from surface observations. There's data from aircraft. There's data from the oceans. We get all kinds of all this different data. And all of this costs money to get, to generate, to collect. And I did mention earlier about Thailand not having a whole lot of money, but compared to the area, Thailand is one of the wealthier countries around here. The problem is, it's not up to Thailand. You need the data in the areas from where the weather is coming. Most of the time, the weather around here comes from the east to the west. So that means we need data from Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and we need data from the ocean, which is really hard to get because we need data from the Pacific Ocean. Most of those countries I mentioned are more poor than Thailand is. Maybe the Philippines isn't, at least in parts. There's parts of the Philippines that are modern and fairly industrialized, but there are also parts that are pretty poor. So the Philippines is kind of maybe similar to Thailand, but Laos, definitely much lower. economically. Cambodia, lower economically. Vietnam has kind of come up a lot in recent years. They've moved up a lot. I'd say they're probably still, though, a little bit below Thailand economically. So you've got all these countries that have even less money than Thailand has. And so they can't do a lot of data collection. So we don't have a lot of data going into the computer models. If you don't have a lot of good data going into the computer models cannot put out a good forecast. And we've seen that just now, over the last couple of days, with Typhoon Kajiki. I have been looking at that to see if whether or not Isan would get flooding rains. Didn't know how much rain they would get. Some models, once Kajiki came inland, had the storm moving off to the west-northwest, which would, and where it was coming in, it was going to then move into Laos. So that would pull it further and further north into Laos as it went inland. And so most of Thailand wouldn't get too much. They get some rain in Isan province. They get some. But not enough for there to be a big flooding problem. Some other computer models had the storm dipping southward as it came inland. And so had it basically moving right over Vientiane, Nang Khai, that area, and then almost kind of bending back, which means it comes over them twice. It would be dying then. Typhoons die as they move inland, so it would be dying out, weakening. But still, the rain can last a long time sometimes. So if it moves over you twice and it moves directly over you, there could have been a tremendous amount of flooding in that part of Laos around Vientiane, but also into Thailand, into Isan. Northern Isan, mostly. That was hard to figure out what was going to happen until really just the last 24 hours. And as I said, that's basically almost when the storm is right on top of you. It just moved in last night, and we only knew what it was going to do maybe 12 hours before then. And by the way, in case you're curious, it does look like it's going to take that slightly more northern track, which means that Isan will get rain. It's raining there now this morning. Maybe even occasionally heavy, but there shouldn't be a lot of flooding. You know, some places flood pretty easily in Thailand, so there might be a little bit of minor flooding here or there. Places that flood a lot and places that flood easily, but mostly there shouldn't be a lot of flooding. And by the way, we're recording this in late August of 2025. Since I mentioned Typhoon Kajiki, if you're listening to this 2 months from now, you may not have any idea what I'm talking about. Where's Typhoon Kajiki? Yes, we're recording this late August of 2025. And Typhoon Kajiki has just moved inland over Vietnam and now into Laos. And of course, it's dying out now that it's inland. All right, so that is the second issue, is the data. The data is not sufficient to produce good forecasts from the computer models. And so the forecasters here, the meteorologists here, are left without any really good information to go on. They kind of have to guess, you know, figure out, well, which model do you think is right? I mean, you don't have the data to back it up. All right, and the third and final issue is that, frankly, the weather here is just more difficult to predict. I mean, in some ways it's easier because it's just, you know, dry season, rainy season. There's going to be showers, or there aren't going to be showers. In that sense, it's easier, but really, the way I hear Thai people complain about it is they're looking for more specificity, in other words, more kind of accuracy and precision than is really possible with this type of weather. Here in the tropics, you know, especially in the rainy season when there's showers around and thunderstorms, storms can just pop up and die down almost randomly. Almost randomly. And they don't have big, broad coverage usually. like a normal storm would, like when Kajiki's coming in. All of Laos, all of northern Thailand, all of northern Vietnam, they all have rain. Everyone's getting rain because it's a big full storm. But with these thunderstorms, the coverage is often small. So a forecaster may tell you have an 80% chance of rain, and you think it's a bad forecast because you got no rain, but 1 kilometer away from you, they may have gotten a ton of rain, and they may have gotten a ton of rain all around you. So the coverage might have been 80%. And you were just in the 20% spot that didn't get it. And I actually saw that happen frequently where I lived in Pinkau a few summers ago. There was a lot of flooding in Bangkok. A lot of flooding. And I was like, what in the world is going on? I was keeping track for 2 months of the rainy season. We got no rain. None. Zero. Middle of the rainy season. Meanwhile, all around Bangkok, it's flooding. Especially, I remember, in the southern side of Bangkok. And out in the... getting my directions correct, out in the eastern side, southern and eastern part of Bangkok, saw quite a lot of flooding that year. Pinkau, we got nothing. So it's just really hard to forecast. So really all the forecasters can do here is just give a general idea of the overall risk. The only way they can really give you a certain forecast that it will rain is if there's actually like the remnants of a typhoon moving in. We talked last week about typhoons in Thailand, and we don't really get them here. But they can. They can. Maybe once a decade, once every 15 years, something like that. Not very often. You can get a tropical storm, even a typhoon, although I think there's only been like one of those in 100 years. But it's not impossible. But it's very rare. But you can get kind of the remnants, the leftovers from them. So you get kind of a broad rain shield from a storm like that. So unless it's something like that, or you're in the middle of the dry season where you just know there's not going to be any rain. I mean, even occasionally in the dry season we get rain, but they can at least, the forecasters are able to at least see the general atmosphere and say that, okay, no, there's definitely not going to be much around today. Or, yeah, today is a day that maybe has a small chance. So unless you're certain there's going to be no rain, or you're certain there is going to be rain because there's a big storm coming in, really all they can do is give probabilities. And that's what they do. There's a 60% chance of rain today. There's a 30% chance of rain today. There's a 50% chance. And I think the way we look at it in the public is we see, okay, if it's more than 50, it's probably going to rain. If it's less than 50, it's probably not going to rain. I mean, that's generally true, but you have to remember that even if it's 80, there's still that 20% that maybe not. Like the example I gave. Maybe not. And even if the chances are only 30%, what if that storm forms right on top of you? You're going to think, oh, that's a terrible forecast. The forecast might have been perfect. That there was only 30% of the people saw rain. But you were one of them. So it looks like a bad forecast because a 30% chance seems pretty low. Shouldn't rain. We should be fine. And then you get rained on. Yeah, so it's really hard to forecast here. All right, so let's summarize that. There are 3 points there. So 1, it is possible that the meteorologists here are maybe a little worse than in some more advanced countries. But again, I think that's the smallest part of the problem. I do not think that's a big problem. I think the forecasters and meteorologists here do as good a job as they possibly could do. I think they do a great job. I think they're fine. They are not the biggest part of the problem. But I am willing to admit that it might be a small part of the problem. Probably the biggest problem is the data issue I mentioned. That is probably the number one problem. It's very difficult to get good forecasts from the computer models because we don't have a lot of data upstream of our weather. What upstream means is like from where the weather's coming from. So off to our east, there's not a lot of good weather data. And so when the computer models take in all the data and then try to figure out what's going to happen, they just don't have a lot that they're working with. So it's hard for them to come up with the right answer. And so then the meteorologist has to look at the map and say, well, is that right? Is that wrong? If it's wrong, which direction do we go in? What's going? It's really hard. It's really hard for the meteorologist to deal with that. And then the third problem is it's just difficult weather to forecast here. Like I said, in some ways, the way you could look at it, you could actually say it's easy. Just rainy season, dry season. In America, we've got all this crazy weather to forecast. Like if you were to compare it to America, since this is an American in Thailand program, American weather is just nuts by comparison. But a lot of that weather is happening on a large scale. From big storms. That is easier to forecast. And especially we have better data there. Not always. We have the Pacific Ocean to our west. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of data over the oceans. So the kind of longer term forecasts that depend on what's happening out in the Pacific, those can be pretty terrible in America as well. But for shorter term forecasts, it's pretty reliable. So even though we have a lot of crazy weather, I still think it's easier to forecast. Like I have trouble forecasting the weather here in Thailand. I really do. It's really hard. I mean, in fact, it's almost impossible. Like I said, the thunderstorms pop up randomly. You can look at the general environment and say that, there's more moisture in the atmosphere today than there was yesterday, so better chance of rain today. Sure. Yes. But to say whether your location is going to have rain or not, the way the thunderstorms pop up and die down, there's almost no way ever to say that. Again, unless it's just middle of the dry season and there's absolutely nothing, so we just know no one's going to have rain. Or there's a big storm coming in, like remnants of a typhoon, and so we know everyone's going to have rain. Unless it's a situation like that, it is basically impossible to say absolutely you will or won't have rain. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about that today because I think it's interesting. I hear a lot of people complaining about the weather forecasts here in Thailand. I wanted to explain to you why I think the weather forecasts are bad here. I wanted to tell you why, in comparison to America, we have more data, we have more predictable weather, things like that. Why, compared to America, American forecasting is better. And I also wanted to note that since I think a lot of people want to blame the meteorologists because that's who are putting out the forecasts, I want to mention that it's probably mostly not their fault. There could be a little bit, but 90% of it is not on them. They are doing an excellent job, the forecasters here in Thailand. All right, so that's it. That's a look at weather forecasting here in Thailand and why it's so difficult. All right, so thank you for joining us today for our An American in Thailand program. Let me reach out to any young people out there and ask them to consider our wonderful university here, RMUTP, or Rajmakhan, University of Technology, Peranakan. Please stay with us and make sure you tune back in next week for another interesting episode. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.